Okay, thank you, Adrian, for that fantastic presentation. We got about 10 minutes for questions and answers, so I'm hoping you've all got, or some of you at least, have got questions. There's lots of microphones floating around, so if you want to ask a question, can you please put your hand up and I'll try and direct proceedings. I will ask a question whilst we're getting everybody organized, and it's a bit of a tough question, I think, for Adrian. One of the things that I'm particularly passionate about or worried about, I guess, is what I see as the homogenization of cities around the world. You know, if you traveled around the world 50 years ago, the architecture was all different. And I think modern architecture and tall buildings specifically are homogenizing cities where the skyline becomes synonymous with a place, but it isn't necessarily born of that place. And so it was interesting to see, you know, your palette of work. The Jinmao building, for example, which the aesthetic expression, I think, is quite closely linked to the culture. And then some of the other buildings where it's a more abstract relationship, where you know, it's more about appreciating that connection on a philosophical level. And I just wondered what your view is on that, of whether, you know, you share that concern or what's your view on that, Adrian?
This on?
Yeah.
I do share that concern, and I think that's one of the driving forces for the search for a contextual approach that one can use to tie the buildings that we all do to their environment, to their culture. And I think that the world is a very rich and diverse place, and that's expressed in the culture of its people, and it's expressed in the architecture that is developed from those cultures, and it's expressed by the nature and character of the location from a point of view pre-air conditioning of how do we create a habitat which is livable and comfortable. And I think we still have that calling. We still need to provide buildings that are livable and comfortable. And it's much easier now because of air conditioning and because of technological advances. But we sometimes forget about the nature of the place, the history of the place, and the culture that has lived in that place and has formed that place for sometimes centuries and even thousands of years. And it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to tie your current architectural technologies to an existing fabric and an existing culture, and indeed those cultures are changing in and of themselves. And what makes it even more difficult is that when we're talking about super tall buildings, these buildings could not have been built in those eras and occupied at least. And so there are very few precedents, there are very few typologies which give us a clue of how they would have done it then. So we're inventing at the same time that we're trying to relate to the past and to generally create the future as well. So it's an interesting dilemma in a way. And it's something that intrigues me. It's something that I try to embody in the work that our firm does. And it's a constant search.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. Right, do we have questions from the floor?
Hear me okay? All right, Gong Kao Fu, IIT. I come from the educational background. The question for both speakers is, what do you think that might be the most important and new things that we need to implement in our education programs, given the reference to when you were a student versus the new generation of architects and engineers?
All right. Actually, my undergraduate was majoring on the kind of architectural department in Tongji University. As a matter of fact, I had been learning or studying a major of urban planning and architecture, so I had this kind of a professional background. But it was a long time ago since I started to study on campus, because I already worked on my professional career for a long time. But based on my personal experience, I think that the education on architectural planning, when it comes to education, we're not supposed to be lingering too much only on the textbook, and we need to give those students more kind of opportunities to be exposed to innovation and creativity. We need to invite those students to have a touch with the general public and with the social communities. Just like, suppose, if we were asked to do design for a kindergarten, and then what about the living habits and the characters or personalities of those kids? If we do not even know that, then it's very hard for us to design a wonderful kindergarten. Maybe the architecture itself will be very wonderful. However, it is not easy to be used by the kids if we do not understand their habits. So in a nutshell, you're not only supposed to be confined to the book, we should also incorporate more creativity and innovation to our educational system, and giving the students more opportunities to work or to be placed on internship with those communities. So then I'm sure the designers will come up with wonderful works. And as Adrian mentioned in his talk, while you produce a piece of work, you're going to have to consider the local context and the local culture. You have to find out about the correlation and the connection. Without insight into the general society as a whole, it's very hard for you to construct a wonderful idea. All right, I wonder whether I answered your question.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. I think we got a question at the back over here. Can you also just state your name and where you're from?
Jean-Paul Tecker, from Dow Corning. A question to Adrian Smith. Looking for the future, what kind of key technologies you think will be needed to continue building your dream?
What kind of key technologies are needed to continue my dream, but also everybody else's dream here, I would think. You know, I think the world is urbanizing, and obviously that's been stated before, that the world is urbanizing at an incredible rate. There are more people now living in urban environments than there are in rural environments, and something in the neighborhood of 65 to 70 million people a year are moving into an urban environment, which implies that the densification of urban areas is going to increase at a rapid pace, probably faster than we can keep up with it. I think the technologies are not the issue. I think it's more the issue of how we plan our cities and how we plan those cities for growth without choking the infrastructure that currently exists and that can be expanded upon without ruining the nature and character of the urban fabric that exists. And I think one of the key issues here is how do you create satellite cities that could surround the major urban complex cities that exist in Asia and in China in particular, and will exist in India and other places where there is dense growth. And how do you tie those satellite cities to the central city so that you give those people that are living in those cities the same access to the highest quality of education and cultural amenities, and at the same time make those cities accessible for communities that are both live and work communities, where people can live in the same area they work, so they don't have to take trains 10 miles in one direction or 20 kilometers in another, and so that they can spend their time more productively. I do believe that it's this more than technology that's going to be the requirement in the near-term 20, 30-year future. I think it's going to be how do you live in cities where you can open your windows and have through ventilation and be comfortable in a very dense, compact area, and in an area that can be afforded to be built. Many of the towers that you see on this wall behind us are very expensive towers that are in and of themselves landscape. These are landmarks for the cities in which they're placed. And I think that not every building that we do is going to be a landmark. Very few buildings we do are going to be landmarks. We need to be focused on the nature and character of the cities for the workers in our world.
So can you please put your hands together a final time for Mr. Gu Jianping and Adrian Smith.